At the end of your life, what will be your legacy? What will you leave behind for future generations? For the world, join the World Messenger, Isabella Lundberg, each week as she brings you a new distinguished guest from the business, sports, or entertainment world to share their success, their struggles, and their lessons. They will share their insights into current hot topics that affect everyone. Isabella facilitates an intimate, vulnerable environment to find the true value of humanity and real leadership. Are you ready for your legacy? The legacy that matters?
What would you do if you had opportunity to change the lives and impact people around the world in a very specific niche, or innovate and transform healthcare, or do something not only through your education, but also opportunities to innovate and change how is care provided in very specific areas? I have tremendous guests here. She's disruptor, she's phenomenal leader, she's innovator, she's futurist because she's showing what's possible in arena of health, biochemistry, and so much more. Truly, words are so short to describe not only the resume and pedigree of this amazing human being that is also a physician, and someone to pioneer the first transplant organs, specifically from live donors, liver transplants, and so much more. So without further ado, let me introduce you to this amazing human being, Susan Mandell, that she will share so much more on this episode of Legacy Leadership. Susan, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for finding the time to join. I know you had such a long career and you still continue to do amazing work, but I want to make sure the way we're impacting, obviously, and sharing the impact that you created and continue to create about others, that others can have a chance also to learn what is possible. So before we dive into, as someone who obviously always had a drive to make a difference, and from early on in your life, how did you even get in the realm of medicine? And how did you even start to add these amazing, not only degrees that are very challenging and difficult, but to build yourself up and continue to show what's possible in so many of these highly regulated industries and niches?
So how did I get to medicine? Well, I actually started as a research scientist at the University of Toronto. And I graduated and got my first national grants to support work I was doing in a biochemistry lab. And I just became interested. I became interested in more biological systems because I started from a very physical chemistry point of view. And then I just became interested in biological chemistries, and my next steps were simply to start to take courses that were based on physiology, understanding of that. And then the next thing I found is that I was heading towards medicine. So when I finished, I finished medicine. During the whole time I was in medicine, I continued to work, to continue my research and publish papers. And during that time, publication was not that common. You did an awful lot of work to put into a publication. But I remember I published a paper in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, which was a very highly rated journal in the area. And I was so shocked that it shocked me into believing I can do anything I really set my mind to.
That is amazing. And it's specifically in arena where a lot of support, specifically as to see the woman that carved such a strong career in early on, because we know that women were not as much supported at that time. How did you step in and get support within your community, obviously, and then be able to continue to advance?
Well, the truth is that I chose very carefully. When I started my PhD program at the University of Toronto, the person I started with, I didn't feel very supported. And so then I moved on to a different supervisor who treated me just like everybody else. Doesn't matter whether it was female, male, or what it was. I just had a feeling that I was just one of his mentees. And so I was probably very fortunate in having that environment, but also it wasn't just pure luck, it was also choice, because I recognized that where I started maybe wasn't the best. And then I moved on to a place where somebody supported me who was blinded to gender and various other things. It just didn't care. All he wanted me to do was do well.
Mm. And obviously, from there, as a scientist and that finished PhD degree, which was, I'm sure, extremely challenging, a lot of dedication, you continued, you did not stop there. What did you do next? I'm just floored how much you accomplished in your professional career. And I want every woman, but also everyone, to see what is possible, specifically during current times.
Well, after I went into medicine, it was very hard for me because I had climbed to the top of my academic field, including getting some of the most competitive grants in Canada at that time. And to find myself at the bottom of the ladder in first year medical school. And so it was an adjustment. And I think that success comes from learning your system very carefully and pulling out the things that are going to advance you and trying to minimize the things that hold you back. And so when I look at my experience, it was not that purposeful, but I realized that's what I was doing. So I kept on moving towards things where there was opportunity. And to look back on my whole career, I would use the term I'm an opportunist, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, in that I don't believe it's just, about being a woman or being whoever you are. You have to look for the opportunity when it arises, and you have to be flexible enough to say, I'm going to take that opportunity. I would have never thought I would have wound up in the field of transplant. It had nothing to do whatsoever with where I came from. I came from a whole different area of, cellular communication proteins. So you'd think, well, you'd wind up in immunology or something like that. But what happened was, as I went through medicine, doors opened, and I then chose to walk through those specific doors because they offered certain things. They offered support, they offered innovation, they offered, advances in some way. And I would ask myself, do I want to do this? As a matter of fact, my first, experience with transplant was at the University of Toronto. I was, the ICU person, and I became almost dismayed about this because it was in the mid-'80s and we hadn't gotten adequate immunosuppressants yet. And so patients did very poorly. And I thought, this is just a terrible area, just a terrible area. And then I remember when we got our first immunosuppressant, which was cyclosporin, all of a sudden a door of opportunity opened. This is a new area. This is an area where you can really save lives, absolutely save lives. And then I moved on to the University of Colorado to help a surgeon reopen the original liver transplant program at the University of Colorado. That is where the first liver transplant in the world was done by Dr. Thomas Starzl. And I remember walking into the operating room, and it was the same operating room he'd actually done his liver transplants in, which was a testament to how the place had to revitalize itself, but also it was eerie. And I remember thinking, this is something really, really special. And the person I worked with, the surgeon I worked with, he was really special. Again, he was just focused on, he didn't care who you were, if you had 3 heads, 1 head, whatever. He just said, we've got to do our best. We've got to make this work, and we've got to save lives. And that was always his attitude. And so, when I had originally looked for jobs that were going to focus on transplant, I focused in on him because it was at what I saw an opportunity that would help me help everybody else survive and get a transplant and have a long-term survival. So,
Wow. So you've been trailblazer, pioneering, and back in the days of the first ever liver transplant.
well, that occurred in the 60s, which was way before my time. Thank God I'm not quite that old. But you know, it really limped and limped and limped along. It was a field that they didn't understand because there wasn't enough understanding of the immunology, and there certainly wasn't enough understanding of how to control the immune response. And really, the major push was done in the UK by Sir Khan, who found actually the first immunosuppressant. He identified the first immunosuppressant called cyclosporin. And it, you know, I will say that the world was a different time then. There wasn't so much, you know, bureaucracy in getting things through. So the time that cyclosporin was discovered to the time that it was put into clinical practice was almost as fast as the COVID vaccines, you know, because there wasn't the all, you know, running of all the bureaucracy to do things. People just said, well, I'm just simply going to use this drug. And it became the standard very quickly. And as you know, probably that that field of immunosuppressants has expanded incredibly. And still not our final answer, but really does still save lives.
So it's such a great opportunity to also look at what historically occurred, and then also, as you said, progression that it's being made, but also tremendous opportunities still to be done. Do you mind sharing for everybody watching and listening? I know that liver transplant, specifically from live organ, can be very random and very rare occurrence, or very rare to really be aware of because unless it happens to someone close to you. But in reality, we're seeing so much due post-COVID and wide range of symptoms, the attributes, how we live, how we also do our daily life, where we see a lot of more risks and more needs and more demand. From preventative aspects of it, what would you like to see or always been advocating for to really change, so that you're not kind of on that spectrum, right? And ever needed, but when you do need, what some of the advice would be in terms of or recommendation for people that simply don't know much about it, what to pay attention to.
So the first thing that I'd really like to bring up is the fact that there are common causes of liver failure that are preventable. And the best thing is not to have to go there, not to have to require a liver transplant. So in the United States, in the 90s, the most common cause, reason for needing liver transplant was hepatitis C. Now there's all kinds of treatment for hepatitis C, and plus we've identified a lot of the vectors that transmit hepatitis C. So the medical community can do an awful lot to reduce the risk of you needing a liver transplant. Hepatitis C is still very big in third world countries, or countries that, I don't know, that just don't screen as widely as they should. And so one of the things that I would like to see, and this would probably have to be through the World Health Organization or other international organizations, is that there is a real push to support screening for hepatitis C. So now in the United States, because I can only really talk about the United States, the most common cause or reason needing a liver transplant is no longer hepatitis C. Treatment, screening, good medical treatment. Now it is what we call non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH. And that is related to a combination of two things. The gene for insulin resistance combined with overweight. So there's an opportunity here for the populace, the physicians, the medical community can never control the weight problem or the screening for this particular condition. In the United States, this condition is not screened for. And this may have to do with, the problems that face, the cost in medicine, which when we think about it, for one liver transplant, we could probably screen, 10,000 people or more. But the individuals who control the access to medicine are no longer physicians. They're people who are in corporate, companies. So we face that problem. People in other countries may not face that same issue, but they may face an issue of not having enough financial resources to screen people for this. But even if you screen somebody for something and you tell them you're at risk, then you have to have a motivation for that individual to want to care for themselves. And I think that, people from all over the world, ranging from social workers to neurobiologists to psychiatrists, still can't figure out how they can motivate people so that people will take positive steps towards, caring for themselves. And so that may be a big area still left in medicine, because when I've traveled around the world, and I've been very fortunate to be able to go to a number of countries to support transplantation in these countries, that one thing I've noticed is the growing global issue of obesity. And so, for example, I was really quite concerned when I was in India, and I saw this growing obesity, and I know that people of that heritage have an increased propensity or prevalence of carrying the of insulin resistance. And I was thinking, oh, this is a terrible combination, and all you have to do is look at diet and you can pick out things in the diet, but people are very culturally bound to their diets and things like that. So I think that, in terms of moving forward in the world for prevention, I think that work on the psychology of why people fail to care for themselves or take the most optimal steps, or what holds them back, is going to be an really important thing. Screening to identify people at risk, saying that, it's only fair to say that, well, if you gain that weight, you are at unusual risk, to do that. We've done that for other conditions such as colon cancer and various things like that. So I think that's important. And then I think in terms of access and caring, the use of human donors is never going to meet the needs of all individuals. It's just simply never going to. It never has in the past, even when there were a lot fewer candidates on the list. And so I know that we put a lot of our efforts into, promoting donation, getting more donors, whether it be living donors, deceased donors, or something like that. And while that's necessary at this time, because we have no real other good options, we need to return to our roots of science and find other options. So we need to be, so for example, there is work that's currently being done on transgenic animals, which are animals that you can manipulate the inheritance on, so that some of these animals, you can use the organs from them and they will look when you implant them, the human body doesn't see them as being that different. There's a long way to go, but this area doesn't have as much support as it should have, because in the meantime, we are still very busy putting our money into fighting COVID and fighting other things, and all the money that goes into neurobiology based diseases such as Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. And so the transplant issue is actually very underfunded, and it is not given the priority it should. I believe, for example, at the National Institutes of Health in the United States, it's not the top priority, transplant, because we can certainly treat a number of people. They are more interested in funding things that are truly killing people at this point. And I'm not going to say that transplant doesn't get funding. Of course it does, but it's not seen as a health crisis that it really is. Because when we look at it, the problem with transplant is that in the majority of cases, transplant is not a cure. Right?
Mhm.
So if you get a transplant, it's not like you're going to return to a normal life. First of all, the quality of your life is highly impacted because you will take, anti-rejection drugs and various other things for the rest of your life. You will face probably a number of medical crises, which are very frightening. In addition, transplant only gives you more quantity of life, and of course, better quality than you had when you had end organ failure. So it takes you really from end organ failure to the categories of organ insufficiency. Because by far, in the majority of people, their bodies continue to attack the transplanted organ. So that's why we talk about organ survival times. So we say the average 1 year survival for a liver transplant patient, 95%. Excellent. And I think that most people who fund science say, that's fine, we're done. But if you look out 5 years, the average survival is only 65% of people who went. And then it continues. It never stops dropping. It never stops. It continues to go on from that. And now we do have people who are long-term survivors who are somehow what we call immunologically privileged. People who stop taking their immunosuppressants and stop seeing their doctors and didn't die and just continue on. We don't know what's special about those people, but there is. But they are so rare. They are so rare. By far the majority of people, even once they get an organ transplant, are going to have a challenging route and can't expect to live their full capacity of what would be predicted for their lives.
This is so eye-opening, and I'm so glad that we have this conversation because I'm all about preventative health. What can I do to position myself for longevity, for long-term health and change and adjust? Others gaining weight and losing weight, having healthy habits, recovering from cold, flu, whatever might be the case, all the way, obviously, as you mentioned, obviously paying attention what we're seeing hugely impacted so many around the world, which, as you mentioned, is obesity. And as a result, how that hinders performance of overall performance, our mood, our mental health, as well as our physical health, right? But then what we do to prevent and educate, I feel like it's not enough of that happening. So hopefully we accomplish something that will be tremendously impactful for others by listening to your impactful and such a powerful share. Because what you don't know, right? But when you do know, now it's time to do better, right? On the flip side, I'm thankful for sharing some of those statistics, how process and journey of being recipient of live organ also has its own journey, and that not always everything as people think might solves. For that matter, I'm sure that ties the same thing for kidney or any other organ donation and transplants that happen and occur at this current time. Would you say that it's still a lot of opportunity there to invest and research, and also that we still have a lot of room to involve, and also a lot of room to tap into different expertise to get maybe to that optimal recovery or opportunities truly, if we're on that other spectrum when we need organ, to truly understand where what life expectancy or risks are associated with that?
I think that there's a lot of opportunities, period, in the field of transplant. When you start from the very beginning of preventing people from getting a transplant, I've never understood why there is such a failure to pay attention to food as being a cause and perhaps a treatment for disease, or most of all prevention. But I can assure you, it's one thing in the United States that doctors do not really spend that much time on. And it's certainly a place where industry trumps health, by financial investment. So McDonald's is a huge corporation that can certainly buy an awful lot of influence in the country. And this kind of thing, I think in countries that have socialized healthcare, such as the Scandinavian countries, Canada, where I came from, there's a lot more emphasis on, preventative measures, because the government is essentially responsible for paying for it. So they can do the math themselves and see that, financial contributions do never outweigh, the cost of the burden of, or the burden of disease, caused by obesity or poor selection in food. So I think that there's tremendous opportunity there in places that are capable, have a construct that are capable of implementing them, and also capable of making them a mainstream of medical education to be passed on to patients. So that's what I see as prevention. The second thing I see as prevention is adequate screening, catching things really early. And I know that there are, liver disease is something, and kidney disease are things that are really not screened for that well. And I think that especially companies in the United States would argue it's not cost effective. That's such a bizarre term when you apply it to medicine. Cost effective. Is it cost effective for your life, or is it cost effective for their company? That's the factor. Because if it's your life, anything is cost effective if you can catch a disease early. So the concept of holding back screening methods because they're not going to be, you're not going to be able to gather enough cases from your screening, I think is a very poor argument. Okay. And, for example, companies in the United States have not to date support screening for ApoB, which is ApoA and B, which are proteins that are inherently, etiologic in cardiovascular disease. And what's one of the biggest killers in the United States and probably worldwide? Cardiovascular disease, especially coronary artery disease. But they say, oh, you don't catch enough cases, but that's not true. That's not true. So, and the thing is that, yes, I would agree that if you started screening everybody, it may not be cost effective. No reason to screen 2-year-olds. Okay. But once we get up, that's why we do risk analysis. And so the whole field of medicine, again, has to become, we think of physicians as very educated, but they are educated, but we don't do enough risk analysis in our practices to say, you need screening, and then justify that. So if somebody's 50 years old, they have to have the type 2 diabetes gene, they're overweight, they're relatively inactive. Yes, an ApoA and B would probably be a very effective screening test to identify whether those individuals had a greater risk of cardiovascular disease. But instead of risk analyzing the population, the corporations that pay for the tests, they just simply say there's not enough cost benefit in that. So, but for the person who then falls down dead, on the sidewalk, yes, it would have been good to know if they would have had those particular risk factors. So so that is an example, just an example under screening, because there's so many more things. There are individuals right now who are working on bringing out a test that is an early detector of liver disease. And it's also a detector of how liver disease changes. And so if you have all of a sudden an increase in it. And I know those individuals are working hard and they're having to get crowdfunding for their project. But if you talk to the people who needed a transplant, they would certainly be more than interested in having that disease, instead of waiting until you had a real adverse event, such as, bleeding from esophageal varices. It would be nice to be able to predict that you're heading in that direction and you need to stop before you get there. But that's not our method these days. Our method is to wait until you have a catastrophe and then go in and treat it. So just an example in the field of liver of screening. And then, of course, the end thing is that I think that the future has to look forward to finding an alternate way of treating end-stage liver disease, because humans are never going to be an adequate source to save all lives. Whether it be just a fear of organ donation, or whether it be, cultural restrictions on organ donation, or what it's going to be. I mean, when I look at some of the countries that do the most liver transplants, so for example, there's the Renji Hospital in Shanghai. Okay, one year they did over 800 liver transplants. Now, they primarily use living donors. And did all their patients who needed a transplant get one? No. And that's over 800, just at one hospital from living donors. So the question is, like, we've absolutely proven this in multiple countries. You're never going to get enough human donors to save all the lives that are at risk. So perhaps it's really time to start pushing, science very hard in the direction of how are we going to solve this organ shortage problem? What are we going to be able to come up with? And we're getting close because we have all the pieces in place. We have these transgenic animals. We have 3D printers that can actually print out an artificial liver. And if you could have the cells to implant that into, and we have a lot of cell biology that has, really, we're very far advanced with that, with understanding how cells go together, hold themselves together, how they communicate. So there's real hope for this. It just needs a big push.
I cannot agree more with you. And it's also, however, gloomy and terrifying is when someone who you care, or your loved ones, or God forbid yourself, finding yourself in that situation, changes completely everything, right? How we look at it, the life and everything else. And I'm also glad to hear how new technological advancements are going to hopefully soon reshape opportunities for the ones that are hopeful, that are waiting, and don't have any other avenue or any other way to gain and receive that much needed organ, so that they can have as much as possible longevity and quality of life that they can have. So in closing, what I would love to, if you don't mind, share, obviously you are faculty, you are teaching, you are engaging, you're still keeping pulse on what's going on global scene, impacting and influencing with so many of your efforts, which again, kudos, and again, such a wonderful way to live fulfilled life. Your legacy is exponential. I feel like one human who did so much. I feel like you lived so many lives in parallel, and changed and shaped so many aspects of medicine today. But with what would be, when we reflect back, something that is still left in your bucket list and something that you would love to be remembered and recognized for, with all of these accomplishments, as part of your timeless legacy?
That's really tough because, as I say, I have gone in a number of directions to open as many doors where doors look like they could be opened. So if I wanted to be remembered for anything, I wanted, certainly to be remembered as a leader in the area that, especially of perioperative care, which is my field of expertise, because it's an area that somehow got forgotten, during as transplant grew. And yet it's the area that truly is where the organ meets the individual, and it's in the hands of the perioperative physicians such as myself. And it's been an area that I have worked so hard at, from patient advocacy to the science, to improving the practices in order to get the best survivals possible. And so I would just want people to remember me for that, for pushing my whole area of science forward. And the one thing that I wanted to really mention is that even though right now we're caught in a conundrum of we don't have the best method, but it's what we have right now to save lives. The one thing that really saves lives is when you do your job well. One of the problems throughout the world is that people are working very hard to save lives, but we don't even have all the information, or even if we do have the information on how to deal with the situation, the care is not given as well as it should, which is why I have traveled all over the world to work with people in different countries in terms of creating practices that really benefit, and educating people on the whole area of perioperative physiology and how patients respond to transplant. That's one thing I would like to leave as a message behind, that if you have a transplant program, it really is, you are really indebted to your patients to make sure that you deliver the absolute best care you can. And if you're not sure if you're delivering the best care, which is a question everybody should ask themselves, bring in somebody to observe your practices and make suggestions.
Wow, that is huge. Huge opportunity of improvement, huge opportunity to continue to learn and do better, and such, again, a tremendous advice, and again, tremendous legacy. And also, before we wrap up, I would love to, if you don't mind, sharing the story that you were so impacted by, and you had a chance to share with me, but I want our audience to hear it, that really was tremendously impactful on you, from young liver donor, recipient, that also what can happen when community and everybody come together, and then how much that impacts you, seeing patients that were either waiting or patients that were receiving, and that you provided that tremendous care and support, and you saw outcome and output that not only lift your spirit, but as you said, persevere day to day, these challenging emotional moments where you poured your heart and soul into practice and also care to go beyond and above.
Yes. Well, I'll just mention that I think you and I had spoken about the fact that what kept me in this area, and I told you that I would come in weird hours for a liver transplant, dragging myself in thinking, whoa, why am I doing this? And I would look and I would see the transplant recipient sitting in the bed that I was going to take care of. And I would think I would be overwhelmed with the bravery and the thoughtfulness of the individuals who were about to receive a transplant, and the courage. And it was just the awe of watching my actual patients that brought me back. And not only brought me back, but I became so fascinated with them of how can people be so, I don't know, just so, endowed with characteristics of the desire for survival and the clarity of mind, that I often went just to see my patients, just to talk to them, of which I'm sure that really helped them, because we really need to support our patients. But so yes, it became a two-way road of me being absolutely amazed by them, and them depending on me as a mentor to help them.
Thank you for listening to Legacy Leader Show. If you enjoyed the content and had a positive experience, then please leave us a positive rating. In addition, leave us a positive review whenever you are listening on whatever platform there might be. Make sure your friends and family also know about the benefit and value that we provide and what we have to offer. Cheers.